Hello and welcome to the BA Liberal Arts Taster Session. My name is Professor Jeremy Hicks. I'm one of the teachers on the programme and I'm going to just introduce you to the main meat of the taster session. And what that's going to be following this very short introduction, and it's going to be given by another one of my colleagues, Dr. Maha Hissy, whose picture you can see here. She doesn't record a video of her own face, you can just hear her voice. So this taster session that you can hear is part of the first year compulsory module for the Liberal Arts BA, and that module is entitled Culture and Language. So this is part of a section on that module about image section on that module about images, about visual cultures, about images and politics, and film and politics. So this is a 20-minute segment, which is one of 4 parts of a pre-recorded lecture that Dr. Maha El-Hissy gives. So what the lecture does is that it introduces students to the connections between images and politics. And it's followed by another section on memes. I'm sure if prospective students were interested, we could send you that taster as well, or that lecture as well, to give you an even better picture. But hopefully this will be enough to give you an idea as to the kinds of things you'll do on the course. Final thing I'd add is that once you do this, you watch this lecture in the course, then you go to a specific seminar group, and the seminar group is, for different groups of people taking the module from different degree programs. For the liberal arts students, there'll be a separate seminar group where you'll be together as liberal arts students. And you'll be looking at particular images with regards to how they relate to political context, and talking about how to write about, how to talk about the political context and significance of images. And then your assessment is to create a meme. Your own meme from a meme generator, one of the sort of common meme generators that are out there, and then to add a commentary, a written commentary as to the political significance of the meme, its relation to other images and to other texts. So I hope you find the lecture, the short segment of a lecture, interesting, and enjoy.
Hello and welcome again. This is now part 2 of the week 10 lecture for culture and language, a lecture on images and politics. In this part of the lecture, I want to discuss a few images and examine closely some elements that add up to constitute certain political messages through an image. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, what would those words say? Certain political messages through an image. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, what would those words say? For example, how is an image composed or arranged, and how can images be arranged in a certain way to deliver a political message? How can we recognize, trace, decipher political icons, codes, and signs in images? What aspects do we need to consider and bear in mind when we think about images and politics, or the politics of images? How can we read the politics of an image or the politics behind an image? And since we have been speaking so far of reading images, let us use some of the terms and categories that we talked about in block 1 on prose and narration, and ask more questions. What is the story or the narrative that is being What is the story or the narrative that is being told in an image? Who is the narrator of the scene that is depicted in an image? Where does the depicted scene in an image take place? How is space organized in an image? And when we address issues around space, we should automatically question the time of an image, and by that I do not only mean the year when a painting was drawn, but want to consider questions such as: how can we read a chronological sequence of events in an image? What is the duration of a scene in an image? Does it happen over an hour, over years, or within a minute? These are some questions that I want to discuss in this part of today's lecture, and while I cannot promise to give an answer to all these questions, I can at least promise to address them in this part of the lecture. Images can show explicit references to politics, such as the example that the group in French discussed in week 9. To politics, such as the example that the group in French discussed in week 9, which is La liberté guidant le peuple, or Liberty leading the people by Delacroix. If we do not know anything about the background of this image, some icons in the picture invite us to embed the depicted scene into a political context. We recognize, for example, a woman holding the tricolore, which is the tricolor or the flag of the revolutionaries. And this colossal woman that we see in the center of the picture is wearing a Phrygian cap that symbolizes liberty and victory. We recognize men holding pistols and other weapons, and if we examine the image closely, we will identify that these protesters are dressed in different fashion, thus representing different social classes, such as the two men on the left who represent the bourgeois and the working class. If we question where and the working class. If we question where this street scene is taking place, we will first not recognize where these protests are happening unless we zoom into the picture. We would then be able to see the Notre Dame Cathedral on the top right of the picture. And if we zoom in even more, we would then, which we'll not do now, but we would then be able to recognize the tricolor on top of the cathedral. Some information on this image would help us uncover more of the political context. If we learn that this is an image from the year 1830, then we can link the scene to the July Revolution that took place in the same year in France and that ousted the French King Charles X. But there is more to say about the depicted scene. If we look at the feet of the figure representing liberty, and at the right side of the image, we will recognize that liberty is crossing the barricade, coming forward and advancing in the fight against the royalists. Crossing the barricade should also be read metaphorically as traversing the monarchic regime. The barricade gives us an indication on the year or the mood at that time in France in 1830, when the outcome of the July Revolution was yet unknown. When we attempt to read the image politically, it is also sensible to consider the name of this painting, namely Liberty Leading the People. And as you see, this is where we would have a further connection of image and word, which was the subject of last week's lecture. However, I would call this a first but not the only political reading of this image. For feminist critics have investigated and pointed out the gender politics of this image and how the image arranges gender roles. While you see male protesters only, the allegory of liberty is presented as a woman, suggesting that women are contributing to the revolution while they are actually being excluded, being ascribed a role as allegories or metaphors only. The fact that she is depicted as gigantic makes her seem even more surreal, shutting her out even more from the street scene. Not only do images, by the way, relate to politics when they present political motifs or respond to historical events. Sometimes even the fact of purchasing and obtaining an image or exhibiting an image are political too. This image by Delacroix, for example, was initially acquired by the French government after King Louis-Philippe I in 1831 to show that he is a supporter of republican values. After King Louis-Philippe I in 1831 to show that he is a supporter of republican values. And then the image was never displayed to the public during the king's reign to avoid showing an example that could incite the people. As you see, not only can politics influence images and motivate certain motifs, images too can affect politics. As I've mentioned before, talking about politics and images involves more than just the painting, the icons that you can see in the painting, or the image composition. Images and politics can also include the framing of an image, circumstances behind obtaining an image, or how and where an image is exhibited. To give you an example of how exhibiting an image can be politically motivated, I will briefly mention a famous image by Jacques-Louis David and how it was presented in the Louvre in Paris. Now what you see here in the image is an image called Les Sabines arrêtant le combat entre Romains et Sabins from the year 1799, or the intervention of the Sabine women. The image tells the story of the founding of ancient Rome. What you see here is how the eye-catching woman in the center, whose name is Hersilia, divides the painting into two asymmetrical parts. With her arms that are extended to the left and right, she separates two hostile nations. The picture is quite complex and would require more time to examine it closely. But the reason why I want to mention it is a detail on how the image was exhibited in the Louvre Museum. To maximize the effect of the image on its viewers, a mirror was placed in the museum opposite to David's tableau. Well, of course, this is not a 3D PowerPoint. Placed in the museum opposite to David's tableau. Well, of course, this is not a 3D PowerPoint, and that's why you cannot really experience it the way it was in the museum, but at least you can see the reflection of the image. When the museum visitors would walk between the image hanging on the wall on one side and its reflection in the mirror opposite to it, they would find themselves surrounded from left and right and by the crowd that is depicted in the image. Exhibiting the image is another example how images can have a socio-political impact on the people and goes beyond the depicted scene in the painting. As you see from the example of liberty guiding the people, nations rely on their visual representations. You might feel reminded of the lecture in Block 1 on the history of the novel and of Benedict Anderson's book Imagined Communities. According to Anderson, nations do not exist as such but are constructed. and one of the media that helps construct such a sense of belonging to one group or one of the media that helps construct such a sense of belonging to one group or one community are images, as they contribute to shaping our imagination. And as you can notice, the word image and imagination are both etymologically intertwined, and they share the same root. To apply Anderson's theory on Delacroix's image, for example, we would say that if someone sees the image of liberty guiding the people, they would see themselves represented or reflected by one or some of the protesters, and as a result, they would imagine a community that they belong to. Let us now have a look at a second example and think more about the relationship between image, politics, and gender, and about how images can institute colonial power. The image that you see here is one of the most famous depictions of colonial expeditions by a 16th century Flemish artist whose name is Van der Straat or Stradanos. The image is called America, or Nova Reperta, which is New Reports. It is an allegory of the European encounter with the New World. The scene depicts the moment when America is discovered by Amerigo Vespucci. America, the naked woman in the hammock, awakens to welcome the arrival of the conquistador or the colonizer. Vespucci, who is standing erect vis-à-vis the naked woman, is holding symbols of Western civilization. An astrolabe, a banner with a crux on it, and if you take a closer look, you should be able to see a hidden sword that he is carrying with him. The caption reads, Americos discovers America. He called her but once, and thenceforth she was always awake. The caption reads, Americos discovers America. He called her but once, and thenceforth she was always awake. If you see the caption that is divided into two parts, one on the left and one on the right. And by now you probably noticed that the image is composed around different opposites: male versus female, fully dressed versus naked body, erect versus awakening position, vertical versus horizontal position, nature versus civilization, and so on and so forth. Why was this image drawn? And who is the narrator of the depicted scene? The image is suggesting that something new is happening, namely the arrival of Amerigo Vespucci, America being discovered, America being named after its discoverer, as if it were a newborn child who is named after the father. So again, the question, why was this image drawn? And what does the image tell us? How are relations of power established in this scene? What does the image tell us? How are relations of power established in this scene? First, the act of colonial appropriation starts with the gaze. A territory must be seen by a white male person so that it would be classified as having been discovered. Second, the act of colonial discovery and European primacy has then to be written down and documented using script as a Western technique of power. And as you see, the image is doing all this. It is documenting and establishing colonial power by representing it visually. Third, the image covers all the violence that happens in the act of colonial appropriation, same as it covers Vespucci's sword, and the image also propagates the conquest as mission to bring civilization to what is presented as being savage and uncivilized. And fourth, the image wants to deliver a message about the colonizer being a hero. You see ships On the left side, you see ships on the left side of the picture, suggesting that Vespucci has just landed in America. And if we bear in mind that colonial expeditions at that time and crossing the ocean from Europe to America was a very dangerous trip, it is not very likely that Vespucci arrived in America shaved and wearing fresh and ironed clothes. So the image wants to give a certain image actually about the colonizer, which is the fact that what he has just accomplished is a heroic act. And fifth, the image, together with the words supporting it, such as the name of the image, establish a relationship or actually a dependency between the colonizer and the colonized by naming a daughter after a father. And as you could hopefully see by now, a whole regime of visual representation performs, documents, propagates colonial mastery and subjugation. The image is depicted or narrated from a white male perspective, and you could try to think or write down how this image could be modified if it were narrated from the perspective of the woman lying in the hammock. Would she be still shown as naked? Will she be welcoming Vespucci? Will she be admitting him entrance into America? Will she accept to take his name? And would the image still depict? Will she accept to take his name? And would the image still depict the scene that we see in the background? I hope you can recognize it. You might need to get closer to the screen. The arrow in the back is supposed to point at what is happening in the background. Now, this scene in the background is the last point that I want to address in this part of the lecture. Also to address time and temporality in an image. What you see in the background is a common depiction or fantasy of colonized people being savages, precisely being cannibals. The people that you see in the background are grilling a person, which suggests that the colonizer will educate and introduce civilized manners to the colonized. The scene also symbolizes the fear of the encounter of the colonizer with the colonized. When is this scene in the background taking place? Is it happening simultaneously while America is welcoming Vespucci? Or could we think of it in relation to potential fear of encounters that would take place in the future? And is the image then collaging past, present, and future by presenting a ship that has anchored a while ago, a welcoming ceremony that is happening now, and a fear that could happen in the future? And as I said, I cannot promise to give an answer to all these questions that I asked in the beginning of this part of the lecture, but I promise to at least address them. And this could be a possible reading, the one that I tried to introduce now. It could be a part of the lecture, but I promise to at least address them. And this could be a possible reading, the one that I tried to introduce now. It could be a possible reading of this image, but it is meant to invite you to think about all those issues and to note your own answers and your own reading of this image.